For more on the ICE protests and immigration enforcement policies, let's bring in Muzaffar Chishti. He is a senior fellow at the Migration Policy Institute. Muzaffar, thanks for joining us first. And second, with a federal judge curbing how ICE can actually operate around peaceful protesters, as Hendrik Sibrandi just reported, is this a real legal turning point?
That was very good reporting, and I think two things to be noted about the judge's decision yesterday. It does not forbid ICE from operating in Minneapolis. That's clear. What it does is question the tactics that ICE can use in its operations. The day you cannot arrest or detain or retaliate against someone unless they are have committed or are committing a crime. And two, you cannot use certain weapons of crowd dispersal like tear gas and that kind of stuff against protesters. So I think in some ways it's sort of the means that ICE can use, but they are obviously still allowed to do what they have been allowed to do in the last week or so. I think it may change the optics on the ground, and that may be a significant development.
And Muzaffar, I want to go a little bit further into the context, because do you think the fatal shooting during an ICE operation could become a moment that permanently reshapes public tolerance for immigration enforcement?
I think that's a really good point. I think what we are saying is that optics in immigration enforcement always matter. The optics of a disorderly border during the Biden administration, you could say, was hugely responsible for the election of Donald Trump for his second term. But now the optics of disorder in our own cities, when you have troops not on the ground, but troops on people's necks, I think that is beginning to have the same kind of a reaction from the public. That look, we may have elected Trump for enforcing our immigration laws, but this is not what we have in mind. And we can already begin to see the fissures, not only in the public opinion, in the Republican Party, and it seems some people close to the White House also.
Muzaffar, you talk about optics. I want to pick up from that point and discuss how does it look when federal and state authorities are suing each other over the enforcement of immigration law?
I mean, this is sort of where your global audience may not be aware that we have a federal system in which states and localities have their own jurisdiction. The federal government has its own jurisdiction. We have been testing the limits of these jurisdictions for at least since 2006. And it's clear that we have sort of a Swiss cheese approach, that there are some jurisdictions, some states which are very cooperative with the federal government, and some states and localities which are not cooperating with the federal government. I think there's good reason to believe that the emphasis on Minneapolis, emphasis on cities like Chicago and LA, is driven by federal government's reaction to the policies of those states. And what you see display are the traditional limits of the power of the federal and the state governments, and they can go both ways.
And Muzaffar, looking forward, are these protests a short-term backlash or the early signs of something like a fundamental shift in how the U.S. approaches immigration enforcement?
I think this is a fundamental shift, and this may last only for this administration, that the militarized approach to immigration enforcement, like the one we have seen in this, has never been seen before. We have had more removals actually under President Obama. We actually had more removals, deportations from the US, even under President Biden's last year. But those happened quietly, they happened at the border, and they happened inside our jails. To do this in the streets of our country and to do this in this militaristic way is unusual and probably not long-lasting.
Muzaffar Chishti, Senior Fellow at the Migration Policy Institute, thank you for your insights.